This powerful and inspiring story will transform the way you see money, faith, and abundance. Could it be that God, the creator of all things, would condemn his children for wanting to live in abundance? See for yourself how God moves when the mind opens to the truth. Samuel used to believe that wealth was the same as corruption, and that God only walked with the poor. But everything changed during a family dinner. One conversation, one revelation, and one old book shattered everything he believed about faith, money, and worthiness. What happened next? You'll be surprised. Watch until the end and discover why God is rich, and he wants you to be too. Chapter 1. The Widow's Son and the Fear of Getting Rich. Samuel grew up surrounded by rosaries, candles, and novenas. On Sundays, he'd wake up early to the smell of fresh coffee and the sweet voice of his mother, Mrs. and calling him to church. The Catholic faith was the foundation of their modest home, and also the lens through which everything was viewed, including money. Mrs. and was a strong woman. Widowed at 40, she raised Samuel alone, with dignity, honesty, and a deep distrust of anything that even hinted at wealth. Son, the poor get into heaven faster. The rich live in paradise here. But after this life they pay the price. Phrases like that became mantras in Samuel's mind. Even while studying engineering at a respected university, he carried guilt for wanting more, for dreaming of comfort, for imagining a life different from the one he knew. He worked part-time as an intern at a hydraulic engineering firm. His pay barely covered his share of the household bills and the bus ride to campus. And yet, whenever he thought about earning more, a voice in his head would whisper, "Careful, Samuel. Greed is a sin." It was as if an invisible, spiritual ceiling kept him from rising. Mrs. N wasn't a bad person. Not at all. She was loving, protective, and gave part of the little she had to the church. But her view of prosperity had been shaped by generations of collective guilt. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And that was the end of the conversation. But was that really what Jesus meant? Would God, the creator of all things, condemn his children for wanting to live in abundance? Samuel had never even considered those questions. Not until he met Mary. She came into his life like a breath of fresh air during his first semester. Intelligent, confident, and full of curiosity about the world. Within a few months, they were dating. Mary didn't talk about money with guilt. On the contrary, she talked about it with ease. Her lightness sometimes unsettled Samuel. How could she say she wanted a big house to travel the world, to live comfortably, without even flinching? You deserve all of that, Sam. And so much more. You just need to change the programming up here, she'd say, gently tapping his forehead with a smile. He'd laugh, but deep down, it stirred something. Then came the invitation. Mary wanted him to meet her parents, Edward and Ruby, a wealthy couple who owned a major construction company in the region. Samuel hesitated, said it might not be the right time. His mother wouldn't be thrilled about the idea. They're different. You'll see, Mary insisted. He went, and that innocent yes, spoken between doubt and fear, became the first step toward a profound transformation. Have you ever felt conditioned to fear money? Have you noticed how certain childhood beliefs still hold you back from prospering? Speech balloon share in the comments. What's the one phrase about money you heard the most growing up? Let's uncover together how many of these ideas might be limiting your life today. Chapter 2. A dinner that would change everything. Mary's parents lived in Westport, Connecticut, a charming tree-lined area filled with white wooden houses and perfectly trimmed gardens. Samuel felt like he was stepping into a movie. The discomfort in his chest grew with every mile they drove, as if he were betraying his own mother. And had been clear. These rich families live off exploiting others. Be careful, Samuel. Don't be fooled by niceties. But Mary had insisted, and he liked her far too much to say no. When they arrived, they were welcomed warmly. Mr. Edward, a tall man with an easy smile and a firm handshake, greeted Samuel with sincerity. Mrs. Ruby, elegant, gentle, and reserved, radiated a kindness that felt almost maternal. Dinner was served in the backyard, under a clear summer sky. The table was decorated simply, a contrast to the grandeur of the house. Samuel didn't know what to expect. He was tense but tried to remain polite. During the meal, the conversation flowed naturally, from engineering projects to college stories to family trips, until Edward turned to Samuel and asked, "And you, Samuel, what are your dreams?" It was as if a spotlight had been turned on him. "Well, I want to become a civil engineer, work on sustainable projects, buildings that make the world better. But I'm still figuring out the path. All I know is, I don't want to be just another guy chasing money all the time." Edward looked at him with interest. Then calmly he replied, "That's a good intention. But let me ask you something. Why do you have such a suspicious view of money?" Samuel went silent. He wasn't sure it was appropriate to speak the truth. Mary noticed his discomfort and gently stepped in. Samuel's mom has a very rigid view of wealth, very religious. She raised him on her own. Edward smiled, as if he deeply understood that kind of background. "I see. My mother was the same. She believed wealth was a trap. But let me tell you something, Samuel. I grew up in a poor neighborhood in Newark, New Jersey. My mom worked as a house cleaner. My father left when I was 8. Nothing came easy." Samuel looked up surprised. Edward continued, "At 25, I was delivering construction materials. And that's when someone handed me a book. A book that helped me understand God never intended scarcity for any of his children." Samuel leaned in, curious. The author's name was Florence Scovel Shinn. She talked about spiritual laws of prosperity, aligned with the Word of God. That set me free. I wasn't sinning by wanting a prosperous life. I was simply recognizing my divine inheritance. Something inside Samuel stirred. "What do you mean, wealth as a divine inheritance? But what about greed?" he asked, still wrapped in the beliefs he had inherited. "Greed is something else entirely," Edward replied. "Prospering with purpose, with ethics, with spiritual alignment, that's completely different. Once you understand that God is rich, you stop believing He wants you struggling just to pay your bills. He wants you to flourish." At that moment, Ruby added, "And when we prosper, we can help more people. That's how we created a foundation for at-risk youth. In fact, we have an internship program that you might be interested in, Samuel." That evening, which had started with tension, ended in reflective silence during the drive home. Samuel didn't say a word, but his heart was restless. What more could lie behind that one phrase? God is rich, and He wants you to be too. If this conversation sparked any reflection for you, then comment below. Did you also grow up hearing that money was dirty or dangerous? Leave your yes or no and take the opportunity to like the video and subscribe. There's a lot of transformation coming in the next chapters. Chapter 3. The Seed Planted in the Heart. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. Mr. Edwards' words echoed inside him like a rebellious mantra. God is rich, and He wants you to be too. He tossed and turned in bed, staring at the ceiling of the small room he shared with stacks of books and a makeshift desk. He thought of his childhood, of Sundays at church with his mother. She would squeeze his hand tightly during the homily, as if trying to carve into his soul the belief that the rich were the wolves of the world. But what if she was wrong? Samuel got up, opened his laptop, typed, "Florence Scovel Shinn." The first phrase he read was, "Man can change the conditions of his life by changing the words he speaks." He felt a chill run down his spine. He started watching a video, then another, and another. Before he knew it, it was nearly 3 a.m. His eyes were filled with tears, stirred by something he couldn't quite name. There was truth in those words, a truth he had never heard before, yet it made his soul feel alive. The next morning, walking to class, Samuel felt like a different person. He couldn't stop thinking about Edward, about Florence, about God. A God he realized he might never have truly known. A God who was abundant, generous, vibrant. That afternoon after class, Mary noticed something different about him. "You seem different, deep in thought." "I am," he replied honestly. "I've been thinking about your father and his story. I never imagined someone that successful came from where he did." Mary smiled lovingly. "I grew up hearing that story. He always told me, it's not what the world thinks of you that defines you, it's what you accept as truth for your own life." Samuel let out a long breath. "You know, my mom always taught me that suffering brings dignity, that money corrupts. But I'm starting to think, maybe the real corruption is living in fear of your own light." Mary stopped and looked at him, surprised. "That's a Florence quote. You've been reading, haven't you?" He nodded, a faint smile on his face. "And I want to read more. I want to understand how your dad went from that neighborhood in Newark to the man he is now. Because maybe I'm just repeating a story that doesn't have to be mine." Mary held his hand firmly. "Then come with me. We're going to my parents' house again this weekend. You need to hear what he's never shared publicly, only with those who truly want to change." Samuel's heart beat faster. Maybe this was the turning point he didn't even know he was waiting for. Maybe this was the chance to write his own story. With faith, with courage, with awareness. And with abundance. Have you ever had that moment when you felt like everything you believed about money might be wrong? Comment below. It hit me. If this has happened to you. And of course, if this content resonates with you, like and subscribe to the channel. The journey is just beginning. Chapter 4. The Roots of Wealth. The sun was beginning to set in Morristown, New Jersey, as Mary's car pulled into her parents' driveway. It was a charming property, discreet yet full of elegance. An immaculate garden, a porch with rocking chairs, and a serene energy in the air. Samuel was nervous. It was his second visit, but now, he was seeing everything with new eyes. Edward welcomed them with the same warm smile as before. But this time there was something more. It was as if he knew. As if he could sense that a transformation had already begun within Samuel. "Welcome back, son," Edward said, extending his hand. "Are you ready?" Samuel hesitated. "Ready for what?" "To hear what no one ever told you. And if you want to change everything." They went to the back of the house. There, Edward kept a small wooden office, cozy with a fireplace and shelves packed with books. At the center of the shelf, proudly displayed, was a worn-out copy of The Game of Life and How to Play It, by Florence Scovel Shinn. Edward sat in an armchair and gestured to the one across from him. "Sit down, Samuel. I'm going to tell you how I went from the basement of a Newark tenement to building my first house at 33. Samuel settled in. Total silence. Edward began. "My father was an alcoholic. My mother was a seamstress and cleaned houses to make ends meet. We had very little, and no faith. I grew up believing life was an unfair fight, and only the cheaters ever won." He paused. "But one day, I walked into a bookstore by accident. The woman at the register, an older lady with a firm voice and an aura I couldn't see, but could feel, looked at me and said, 'You look lost. Take this book. Pay for it only if you feel it was worth it.' It was Florence Scovel Shinn." Samuel widened his eyes. "You're telling me?" "Yes, I read that book in one night. First it all felt strange. Affirmations. Creative word. But there was something powerful there. Something no church had ever told me. That I could co-create with God. That poverty wasn't holiness. It was disconnection." Samuel listened, captivated. "I started applying what I'd learned. Speaking differently. Thinking differently. I began writing goals with faith, visualizing myself winning. And the hardest part, I stopped complaining." Florence said, "Every word that leaves your mouth must be a seed of faith, never a seed of fear. And I made a commitment to that." Samuel whispered, And did it work? Edward chuckled gently. You're sitting in the result of it. A deep silence followed. Edward leaned forward, eyes fixed on Samuel. But the real wealth wasn't the money. It was the peace. The certainty that God was with me, not against me. That he didn't want to see me starving as a test, but flourishing, so I could bless the world with the gifts he gave me. Samuel felt a lump in his throat. That's everything I've always wanted to hear, but never knew. Edward smiled. Then now that you've heard it, what will you do with it? Samuel didn't answer, but deep down he knew. The answer would come through his choices, from that moment on. If this chapter touched your heart, write in the comments, God wants me to blossom. And if you haven't enjoyed the video yet, take advantage now and subscribe. The next chapters will surprise you even more. Chapter 5. The Seed of Conflict. On the way back home, Samuel couldn't take his eyes off the car window. Mary drove in silence, respecting the inner storm her boyfriend was going through. He wasn't really there, or rather he was deep inside Edward's words. Poverty isn't holiness. It's disconnection. God wants you to flourish. Those ideas clashed with everything his mother had ever taught him. Mrs. N was devout, loving, but her beliefs were like old stone walls, built up one brick at a time over the years. That night, when they got home, Samuel walked in and found her sitting in her favorite armchair, rosary in hand. The TV was on, playing a religious program. "Hi, Mom." She looked up at him and smiled. How was it with the girl's parents? He hesitated. It was different. Her father talked about God in a way I've never heard before. Mrs. N frowned. What way? Samuel sat down across from her. He said that God doesn't want anyone to be poor. That wealth is a divine blessing. That poverty comes from disconnection with the divine. And he showed me a book by someone named Florence Scovel Shinn. His mother's face hardened. That kind of talk is dangerous, Samuel. That's heresy dressed up as self-help. It pulls you away from humility and leads to pride. Samuel took a deep breath. But Mom, he's a good man. Simple, generous. He built everything with effort and faith. He said the book helped him understand that he could co-create with God. Co-create? She repeated, nearly offended. Who does man think he is to believe he creates anything? Only God creates. And he is pleased with the humble, with the poor in spirit. Remember what Jesus said. It is easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Samuel shrank. That phrase echoed like a verdict. But what if we've been interpreting it wrong? What if wealth isn't the problem, but the attachment to it is? What if God does want us to prosper so we can help others? Mrs. N stood up, eyes stern. You're being poisoned by ideas that go against what I taught you. The Bible is not up for debate. Samuel didn't respond. He knew that moment wasn't the time for arguing. But he also knew the seed had been planted. Something inside him had awakened, and it wouldn't be silenced so easily. That night, locked in his room, he searched on his phone. Florence Scovel Shinn, prosperity quotes. Among many, one jumped off the screen. No man can attract prosperity if he despises the rich. He felt a chill. It felt like it was written for him. Or for his mother. And then he made a decision. He would get the book. And he would read it, in secret. Have you ever had to break with old beliefs to follow a new path? Comment below. The truth sets me free. And if you haven't liked this video yet, do so now. The story is just beginning. Chapter 6. The book that wasn't just a book. The afternoon when Edward handed that book to Samuel didn't seem, at first glance, like anything extraordinary. They were sitting on the back porch of the house, under the shade of an apple tree. Ruby had brought out fresh lemonade and left the two of them alone, as she had done before. There was silence between them, but not an uncomfortable one. It was as if both were listening to something that couldn't be spoken aloud. With his usual calm, Edward extended the book toward Samuel. "Read it, but not like you'd read a manual. Read it with an open heart. Florence changed everything for me." On the cover, the simple title, "The Game of Life and How to Play It." Florence Scovel Shinn. Samuel turned the book over in his hands, feeling the symbolic weight of the gift. Edward wasn't a man who gave advice lightly. Everything about him was quiet action, deep observation. "Is it spiritual?" Samuel asked, a bit wary that it might be another shallow self-help book. Edward smiled. "It is spiritual, yes. But it's also profoundly practical. But it's going to ask something of you." "What?" "To let go of the God you were taught, and meet the God who actually exists." Samuel fell silent. Those words stirred something in him more than he wanted to admit. That night, when he got home, he found his mother and preparing dinner. When she saw the book in his hands, she frowned. Another one of those silly things rich people read to justify their greed. Samuel took a deep breath. Out of respect, he didn't reply. He simply went upstairs with the book in hand. He closed the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened it to the first page. He read softly, "Nothing is against you except the thoughts you think." He stopped. That didn't feel like just a phrase. Felt like a mirror. He kept reading page after page, as if each one peeled away layers of fog built up by years of limiting beliefs. It was as if each word deprogrammed something inside him. He began to understand what Edward had meant. Through his words, man makes his affirmation of truth or error. Suddenly, the problem wasn't out there anymore. Not with the rich, not with the system, not with others. It was inside. In the words. In the thoughts. What if it were true? What if he had been sabotaging himself all along, believing that to become wealthy was to betray God? And what if, in truth, God actually desired his prosperity? The next morning, he went to college with the book in his backpack. He met up with Mary and told her about the book her father had given him. She smiled and said Florence had been the one who taught her father to prosper with integrity. "Do you really think God is offended by someone who prospers honestly?" she asked. Samuel looked at her. And for the first time, he didn't know how to answer. But he could feel he was about to find out. If you feel something has started to move inside you, leave a comment. I'm ready to see God with new eyes. And take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. The journey continues, and you won't want to stop now. Chapter 7. The first statement that changed everything. In the days that followed, Samuel began carrying with him the book Edward had given him, The Game of Life and How to Play It. It wasn't just an object in his backpack. It was a constant reminder that something greater was being awakened within him. It felt as if, with each page he read, reality was slowly being reorganized. Florence's words were simple, yet they pierced like precise arrows. She spoke of active faith, of words as creative instruments, of God as an inexhaustible source of good. The subconscious mind doesn't argue with you. It accepts what you decree. Samuel paused. He began to notice the difference between the God he had grown up fearing and the God Florence revealed. Not a distant judge, nor a punisher of the ambitious, but a present creator, a father who desired the abundance of his children. That night, lying in his room, Samuel did something he had never done before. He prayed boldly, "God, I don't want to be afraid of wealth anymore. If it comes from you, teach me to use it wisely. I let go of the beliefs that limit me. Guide me, show me the way." The next day, he arrived early at college and found Mary near the library. She hugged him, surprised by his lightness. "You seem different," he smiled. "I think I'm meeting God again. And maybe, for the first time, truly." Mary was moved. She said her father would be happy to hear that. The following week, Edward invited Samuel to lunch again. This time, just the two of them. They went to a small Italian restaurant in Hackensack. "Did you read the book?" Edward asked. Yes, and I'm shocked. It's like someone took a blindfold off my eyes. For the first time, I feel like I can love God without needing to run from success. Edward smiled serenely. Florence was my guide too. I used to be a construction worker, worked hard but always in debt. Until one day, an evangelical bricklayer handed me a flyer with one of her quotes. Samuel laughed. A bricklayer? Yes, and it was the first time I heard, man's words are magic wands. That night, everything changed. The conversation lasted for hours. Edward shared how he used affirmations, how he applied faith daily, and how he learned to listen to his intuition, that soft voice that guides you when the mind becomes still. Prosperity isn't about having more than others. It's about having enough to fulfill your mission, and to help others fulfill theirs. Samuel had never heard someone talk about money with such peace. On the way home, he felt like something had broken inside him. But it wasn't pain, it was liberation. Nothing is too small for God, and nothing is too big. Are you also beginning to see God differently? Comment. Now I see with the eyes of my soul. And if this video touches you, leave a like. This is how the message continues to reach hearts. Chapter 8. When you stop resisting, everything starts to flow. That Sunday, Samuel sat alone on a bench at Riverbank Park in Trenton, watching the Delaware River glide peacefully before him. Florence's book lay open on his lap, but his eyes were distant. For the first time, he wasn't just reading, he was absorbing. The words, "Nothing is too great for God to accomplish," echoed within him like a hymn. That message directly challenged everything his mother had taught him throughout his life. In her view, asking God for something material was almost blasphemous. But there, surrounded by divine creation, something about it made sense in a new and comforting way. Samuel began to realize that his mind carried more than just ideas. It carried blocks. One by one, he began identifying inherited beliefs like, money is dirty. Those who get rich lose their soul. Humility lies in lack. And for the first time, he understood. True humility is accepting that God desires the best for his children. That afternoon, he did something different. He entered a state of acceptance. When he got home, he wrote in large letters an affirmation taken directly from the book. God is my inexhaustible source. I now gratefully receive all that he has already prepared for me. He taped it to his bedroom wall and repeated it until he believed it, repeated it until he cried. The next day, upon arriving at college, his structural engineering professor announced there would be an internship opportunity at a renowned construction firm in New Jersey, Edward's company. Mary, who was also studying engineering, squeezed his hand with excitement. This is your chance, Sam. You're ready. Ready, maybe not, but willing, yes. That night, Samuel didn't sleep, but not out of anxiety. He spent hours mentally reviewing all the lessons of the week. As Florence taught, he decided to act as if he already was. Already prosperous, already deserving, already in the right place. He submitted his internship application calmly, not thinking about competition, not diminishing himself, just with confidence. As he left the registration office, Mary found him and asked, "What did you write in your essay?" Samuel smiled. "I wrote that I want to learn from those who build not only structures, but lives based on faith." Mary looked at him, surprised. It was a new version of him standing there. More grounded, more open, more connected. The following week, Samuel received an email from the company. He was among the 3 finalists. The final step would be an in-person interview with Edward. When Mary found out, she was thrilled. But Samuel, on the other hand, felt his heart grow heavy. The old guilt crept in. Am I being favored just because I'm dating his daughter? That night, with the book still beside his bed, he opened it randomly and read, "Man does not need to force or beg. He simply needs to align with the right idea and it will manifest." Samuel took a deep breath. That was it. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. He didn't need to push. Only allow. What was meant to be his would find its way. Chapter 9. The millionaire mind is not inherited, it is chosen. Samuel was stepping off the bus from Princeton when he noticed something strange. For the first time, he wasn't anxious about the structural calculus exam the next day. It wasn't because he had studied more. It was because he had understood more. Not just formulas, but the logic of the universe. The divine mathematics. That thing Edward used to say. When you are spiritually aligned with the source, even life's equations resolve with less resistance. In his backpack, Florence's book was scribbled on, dog-eared, and filled with colorful sticky notes. He now carried it like an extension of his soul. As soon as he got home, he saw his mother, Mrs. and folding clothes on the living room couch. She looked at him with a mix of longing and suspicion. "You don't go to Mass with me anymore, Samuel," she said, firm but sad. "Mom, I still pray. But now I understand that God doesn't want us to live in fear of life. Or of money." She closed her eyes, swallowed hard. Samuel knew he was touching decades of deeply rooted beliefs. But the time had come. "You taught me faith. You taught me how to pray. But you didn't teach me how to receive. I used to be ashamed of wanting, afraid to prosper, as if being poor made someone holier." And lowered her head. Silence. Samuel sat beside her. "Mom, Edward gave me this book. He told me his story. And do you know what touched me the most? He said that when he was poor, he also believed that wealth was dirty, that it was a game for the unscrupulous. But Florence showed him it's a game of consciousness, of faith in motion." He handed her the book. Florence says, "Man must prepare to receive what he has asked for. Mom, you spent your whole life asking for peace, health, protection. But you never asked for prosperity. Why?" She didn't answer. But she kept the book in her hands. 2 days later, and woke up early. She made pancakes. With real coffee, not the usual instant kind. "Today's your last day of class before break, right?" she asked, sitting with him. Samuel nodded, surprised by her gesture. "I read some of that book of yours. What she says, it kind of makes sense. Your God is the same as mine. But he sounds fairer in your words. I'll finish reading it and give it back to you later." She looked at him with teary eyes. "I always thought wealth was dangerous. I just didn't know there was another way." Samuel held her hand. "I know, Mom. But now we know that our God is one, generous, and he wants us to prosper." The following week, Samuel joined Edward at a sustainable construction event in Newark. It wasn't like technical engineering conferences. It was about future vision, social impact, and prosperous conscious leadership. During one panel, Edward was called on stage to be honored for an affordable housing project. When asked about his greatest asset, he replied, "I learned from Florence Scovel Shinn that the mind is the construction site where every reality is built. Before raising walls, I had to raise a new consciousness." Samuel gave him a standing ovation. He knew it now. A millionaire mind isn't inherited. It's chosen. It's cultivated. It's nourished with faith and truth. And he had chosen his. If this story resonates with you, like this video and subscribe to the channel. This way you'll help this message reach more people like you. And activate the bell. And let's move on to the final chapter of this spiritual and transformative journey. Chapter 10. Wealth is a state of mind. It was the last Sunday of summer in Princeton. Samuel was walking through Community Park North with Mary. Autumn was already peeking through the golden leaves that had begun to fall. He held her hand calmly. A new peace lived in his chest. But it wasn't the peace of the resigned. It was the peace of the awakened. "Edward invited me to intern at his company after the semester ends," Samuel said. "But that's not what makes me happy. It's knowing that I finally understand what it means to prosper with purpose." Mary smiled. "You've changed, you know that? not just on the outside. Here. She touched his chest. You're lighter, more confident, more whole. Samuel smiled back. I realized that God is rich, and He wants us to reflect that richness, not just in money but in ideas, in faith, in presence. Edward taught me that. But it was Florence who opened my eyes. At the Sunday dinner, Edward had prepared a special meal. He invited Samuel, Mary, and Anne, who now wore a new necklace, simple yet beautiful. Small details revealed something. She was blooming. Remember when I told you God is an architect? Edward said, pouring wine. Well, His design is for us to live with abundance, generosity, and love. But the ground has to be cleared. No debris of guilt, fear, or shame. Anne nodded. And, to everyone's surprise, she added, forgive me. For years I thought being poor was more virtuous. And it's not. It's just a state. One that can be transformed through awareness. Samuel showed me that, thank God. Silence. Samuel looked at his mother with admiration. She truly was changing. And he knew, when a mother's mind changes, an entire lineage is transformed. That night, before going to bed, Samuel did what he had learned from Florence. He sat on the edge of his bed, took a deep breath, and prayed silently. I align myself with the prosperity of God. I release all limiting beliefs. I receive, with gratitude, the visible and invisible riches of the universe. I am prosperous. I am guided. I am worthy. Then, before lying down, he opened the book at random, as he did every day. The phrase he read felt like it had been written just for him. Nothing is impossible for God, and nothing is difficult for the man who trusts in God. He smiled. The boy who once felt ashamed of wanting, now desired with faith, with awareness, with surrender. Samuel had understood. Wealth is not an external accumulation. It is an internal expression, a manifestation of the divine that lives within us. And the game of life now was working in his favor. If this story touched you in any way, please like it and share it with someone who needs to hear this truth. Subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. Your spiritual journey to prosperity is just beginning. Samuel's story reminds us that to prosper is a spiritual right, not an earthly privilege. For a long time, he believed wealth was synonymous with greed, that being poor was being pure, that God blessed those who suffered the most. But when truth reached him, through a wise man and a divine book, he was set free. Yes, God is rich, and He wants you to manifest that richness with faith, awareness, and action. It's not about accumulating money out of vanity. It's about recognizing that abundance is a language of God, and each one of us can learn to speak it. You can transform your reality too. You can also play the game of life with the right cards. The key is in the mind. The door is in the heart, and the path begins with faith. Back and index pointing right. If this message spoke to you, leave a like now. Upbox tray, share this video with someone who needs this truth. White heavy check mark and subscribe to the channel Shinn's Spiritual Truths. Every week, new stories and transformative teachings inspired by Florence Scovel Shinn. Push pin and don't forget, the quotes from Florence Scovel Shinn used in this video are in the video description and pinned comment.